Do you think you hold all the power? That a badge somehow turns you into a god? Think again. Two officers believed they were simply taking out the trash when they arrested a black man at a gas station for absolutely nothing. They laughed in his face. They mocked his clothes. They ignored his rights. But they made one fatal mistake. They never bothered to find out who he truly was. Because that man wasn't just some suspect, he was the Honorable Judge Desmond Vale. And those same two officers walked into a courtroom and looked up to see the man they had assaulted now seated on the bench. What happened next wasn't merely justice. It was a brutal, soul-shaking lesson in karma. Buckle up. The neon sign of the Chevron on 4th and Main buzzed with an irritating flicker, casting a sickly yellow light over the wet asphalt. The air hung thick with humidity, the kind that clings to your skin and makes your shirt stick to your back. Desmond Vale stood by pump number 4, watching the numbers tick up on the display of his vintage 1969 Mustang. He wasn't wearing his robes, nor one of his tailored Italian suits. He had on a faded gray hoodie, baggy sweatpants, and worn-out sneakers. He had just come from helping his elderly father move boxes out of the basement. He looked tired. He looked disheveled. To the untrained eye, he looked like nobody. And that was exactly the problem for Officer Colt Harlan and his partner, Officer Mateo Reyes. Their cruiser rolled into the station, tires crunching over discarded soda cans. Harlan was driving, a veteran of the force known in the precinct for his high arrest record and the growing pile of excessive force complaints that the union kept quietly burying. Reyes was younger, eager to impress, and had already copied Harlan's sneer. "Check him out," Harlan muttered, killing the headlights but leaving the engine running. He nodded toward Desmond. "Mustang like that in this neighborhood? Guy looks like he slept in a dumpster, probably stolen." Reyes's hand drifted instinctively toward the door handle. Desmond didn't look up as the officers approached. He was thinking about the case docket waiting for him, a particularly messy RICO hearing involving local corruption. He just wanted his gas, his Gatorade, and his bed. "Yo, Chief," Harlan barked. He didn't say sir. He didn't say excuse me. Desmond paused, the gas nozzle still in his hand, and turned slowly. His face remained calm, his eyes sharp and analytical, the gaze of a man who had spent decades dissecting lies. "Can I help you, officers?" "Nice car," Harlan said, circling the vehicle and running his hand along the pristine hood. He stopped, leaned in close. "Whose is it?" "It's mine," Desmond replied, his voice deep and steady. "Yours?" Reyes laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Registration and ID. It's in the glove box. If you'll allow me to finish fueling, I'll retrieve it." "Step away from the vehicle!" Harlan suddenly shouted, his hand dropping to his holster. The escalation was instant, artificial, and practiced. Hands on the roof. Now. Desmond didn't flinch. He knew the law better than he knew the back of his own hand. He knew they needed reasonable suspicion to detain him. They had none. But he also knew the harsh reality of the street. Arguing the Fourth Amendment with a jumpy cop was a good way to get shot. Desmond sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion, and placed his hands on the cold metal of the Mustang's roof. "Spread them," Reyes ordered, kicking Desmond's ankles apart roughly. "Officer," Desmond said calmly, his cheek pressed against the wet metal, "I'm going to ask you for the reasonable suspicion that precipitated this stop. I haven't committed a traffic violation. I am pumping gas." Harlan froze. He hated it when they used big words. "Precipitated? You want suspicion? You match the description of a suspect involved in a carjacking 2 miles east. That good enough for you, lawyer man?" It was a lie. Desmond knew it. Harlan knew it. The radio had been silent. "Check his pockets," Harlan commanded. Reyes shoved his hands into Desmond's hoodie pockets and pulled out a wallet, a pack of gum, and a receipt from a hardware store. He flipped the wallet open, but ignored the ID, going straight for the cash. "Got about $300 here," he said, raising an eyebrow. "Drug money?" Desmond closed his eyes. "That is for a contractor. My father is renovating his house." "Sure it is," Harlan sneered. He grabbed the wallet and glanced at the license. Desmond J. Vale. The name didn't ring a bell. Harlan didn't follow local politics and certainly didn't spend time in the aggressive litigation courts downtown. He assumed Desmond was just another guy with a mouth. You know what, Desmond? Harlan tossed the wallet onto the hood, scattering the cards. You're giving me attitude. I don't like attitude. It makes me feel unsafe. I think you're resisting. I am standing perfectly still, Desmond said. Stop resisting, Harlan screamed. He grabbed Desmond's wrist and twisted it behind his back with enough torque to pop the shoulder joint. Pain shot up Desmond's arm, but he bit his lip. He didn't scream. He didn't fight back. He allowed Reyes to slam the cuffs onto his wrists tighter than regulation allowed. You're making a mistake, Desmond whispered as they shoved him toward the cruiser. A very expensive mistake. Harlan slammed the door on Desmond's head intentionally before pushing him into the back seat. Leaning in, he whispered, his breath sour with stale coffee and tobacco. I'm the law tonight, buddy. And tonight, the law says you're taking a ride. The holding cell at the precinct smelled of urine, bleach, and despair. It was a concrete box, painted in institutional green. They had processed Desmond like a piece of meat. Fingerprints, mugshot. They had stripped him of his shoelaces and belt, leaving him holding up his sweatpants like a child. When he politely but firmly asked to make his phone call, the booking sergeant just laughed. Phone's broken, pal. They threw him in the drunk tank. Desmond sat on the cold metal bench in the corner, surrounded by the usual crowd. A kid caught tagging a wall. A weeping man in a tuxedo who had clearly had too much to drink at a wedding, and a homeless man screaming at invisible spiders. Desmond didn't scream. He didn't cry. He sat with his back straight, legs crossed at the ankles, eyes closed. He was meditating. But inside his mind, he was building a file. Exhibit A, lack of probable cause. Exhibit B, excessive force during cuffing. Exhibit C, denial of counsel and phone privileges. Exhibit D, theft. They hadn't logged the $300 he had watched Reyes pocket. Harlan and Reyes walked past the cell bars, holding coffees and laughing. Hey, Mustang, Harlan yelled, rapping his baton against the bars. The noise made the drunk man jump. You comfy in there? Maybe if you're nice, I'll let you go with a disorderly conduct charge. Save you a trip to the big house. Desmond opened his eyes. The room seemed to drop a few degrees in temperature. Officer Harlan, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise like razor wire. I have a hearing. It is imperative that I be there. A hearing? Reyes snorted. For what? Your parking tickets? I am presiding, Desmond said simply. The two cops stared at him for a second, then exploded into laughter. Harlan laughed so hard, he spilled coffee on his boots. Presiding? Oh, that's rich. You hear that, Mateo? He's a judge, and I'm the Queen of England. Harlan walked up to the bars, his face inches from Desmond's. Look at you. You're in sweatpants. You're nothing. You're a judge of what? The best flavor of crack? Desmond didn't blink. Badge number 4922, Officer Colt Harlan. Badge number 5819, Officer Mateo Reyes. I suggest you log my cash into evidence immediately, and I suggest you prepare a very good explanation for why I am currently detained without a warrant. Harlan's smile faded. There was something in Desmond's tone, the absolute unwavering authority, that sent a tiny shiver of doubt down his spine, but his ego was too big to listen. Shut him up, he muttered to the sergeant. He's annoying me. They left him there. When a new sergeant walked past the cell, she stopped. She frowned. She looked at the man sitting in the corner, looking dignified despite the sweatpants. She unlocked the cell. Sir, she asked tentatively, you look familiar. I should hope so, Sergeant Vargas, Desmond said, standing and smoothing his hoodie. I signed your warrant request for the 5th Street raid last week. Vargas's face went white. She scrambled for the logbook. Judge Vale? Oh my God. The log says John Doe, refused to identify. I identified myself 3 times, Desmond said calmly. Officer Harlan preferred his own version of reality. I need a phone, Sergeant, and I need a ride to the courthouse. I have a docket, and I believe Officers Harlan and Reyes are on the schedule for a preliminary hearing regarding the drug charges on the West Side. Yes, Your Honor. They are the arresting officers in State versus Ellis. Desmond smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. Excellent, he said. Don't tell them I'm released. Let them come to court. The sun rose over Chicago with a deceptive beauty, painting the skyline in hues of gold and pink that reflected off the glass towers of the Loop. But down in the locker room of the precinct, the air was stale, smelling of Old Spice, sweat, and impending arrogance. Officer Colt Harlan was in a good mood. He stood in front of the scratched mirror, adjusting his tie. He liked court days. Court days meant overtime pay, air conditioning instead of chasing people down alleyways, and most of all, power. There was a specific thrill Harlan got from taking the stand, the way the jury looked at him, the hero in the uniform, trusting his every word, while the defense attorney squirmed. You see the game last night? Reyes asked, lacing up his patent leather dress shoes. Caught the highlights, Harlan replied, checking his teeth. Hey, you logged that cash from the gas station guy? Reyes froze for a split second, then laughed. Log it? I thought we were holding it for safekeeping, just in case he comes back for it. Harlan turned, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. That's my boy. He won't come back. Guys like that get cut loose and run. He probably had a warrant 2 states over. They shared a look of conspiratorial comfort. This was their routine. The street tax. They didn't see themselves as corrupt. They saw themselves as the grim reapers of a chaotic city, taking a little off the top for their trouble. Who was going to stop them? Internal affairs was backlogged for years. The captain was counting down the days to retirement. They were untouchable. Teflon. Let's go nail this Ellis kid, Harlan said, slamming his locker shut. I want to be out by lunch. There's a brisket sandwich at Manny's with my name on it. The case of State versus Quincy Ellis was a slam dunk, at least in their eyes. They had arrested the young man for possession with intent to distribute. They claimed they saw him drop a baggie of heroin. Quincy claimed he was waiting for a bus, and they planted it. It was the oldest story in the book, and usually the book ended with the badge winning. They drove to the Cook County Criminal Courthouse. The building was a fortress of limestone, imposing and heavy. As they walked through the metal detectors, bypassing the long line of civilians, they high-fived the deputies. They walked with the swagger of men who owned the building. They made their way to the courtroom. Who's on the bench today? Reyes asked, checking the docket posted outside the heavy oak doors. Judge Henderson is on medical leave. It says visiting judge, probably some substitute from traffic court. Easy pickings. They usually just rubber stamp whatever we say because they're terrified of looking soft on crime. They pushed through the doors. The courtroom was buzzing. The air felt different, tenser, sharper. The gallery was unusually full. A few reporters sat in the back row, notebooks out. That was odd for a preliminary hearing. Defense attorney Brooke Harper sat at her table, looking nervous. Next to her, Quincy Ellis looked terrified, his leg bouncing uncontrollably under the table. Harlan and Reyes took their seats in the front row, behind the prosecutor, a young, overworked assistant state's attorney named Blake Caldwell. Hey, Blake, Harlan whispered, leaning forward. We're good to go. Quick in and out? Caldwell turned around. He looked pale. He was sweating. I wouldn't bet on it, Colt. Have you heard who the visiting judge is? No, Harlan shrugged. Who cares? Desmond Vale, Caldwell whispered. The name dropped like a lead weight. Harlan frowned. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. So? He's legendary, Caldwell hissed. He spent years as a civil rights attorney before he took the bench. He eats bad procedure for breakfast. He's been presiding over the federal corruption probe downtown. I don't know why he's slumming it in state court today, but everybody is on edge. You guys better have your paperwork perfect. Reyes swallowed hard. Vale, is he strict? He's not strict, Caldwell said, turning back to his files. He's surgical. Harlan leaned back, crossing his arms. He felt a flicker of annoyance. He hated activist judges, but he wasn't worried. He was Officer Colt Harlan. He knew how to play the game. He would just use his command voice, stick to the script, and this Vale guy would have no choice but to bind Ellis over for trial. "Relax," he whispered to Reyes. "It's just a judge." They all put their robes on one leg at a time. The side door opened. The bailiff, a towering man with a voice like a foghorn, stepped forward. "All rise!" The room shuffled to its feet, the rustle of fabric and the creak of benches filling the air. Then, Judge Desmond Vale walked in. He moved with silent, predatory grace. Desmond Vale was no longer the man in the gray hoodie. He was transformed. He wore a judicial robe that seemed to swallow the light, tailored perfectly to his broad shoulders. Underneath, the collar of a crisp white shirt and a silk tie were visible, but it was his face that froze the blood in Colt Harlan's veins. Desmond ascended the steps to the bench. He didn't look at the files. He didn't look at the clerk. He looked straight ahead, scanning the courtroom with eyes that were cold, hard, and utterly devoid of mercy. He stood behind his high chair for a moment, letting the silence stretch. It was a power move. He was letting them sweat. Then his gaze locked onto the front row. He found Harlan. For a moment, Harlan didn't recognize him. The context was too different. The man at the gas station had been a thug, a nobody. This man was a titan of the law. But then Desmond tilted his head slightly to the left, a small, subtle movement, and raised his left hand to adjust his glasses. On his left wrist, just peeking out from the sleeve of the robe, was a dark purple bruise the shape of a thumb. The memory of the gas station slammed into Harlan like a freight train. The Mustang, the hoodie, the twist of the arm. "I am presiding?" The words echoed in Harlan's head. Harlan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His world tilted on its axis. The fluorescent lights of the courtroom seemed suddenly brighter, harsher. He felt a bead of sweat roll down his spine, icy cold. He nudged Reyes. "Mateo," he choked out. Reyes looked up. He followed Harlan's gaze. He saw the judge. He saw the face of the man he had kicked. Reyes turned the color of ash. He gripped the bench in front of him until his knuckles turned white. "Oh no," he whispered. "Oh God, Colt. That's him." "Be seated," Judge Vale said. His voice was the same, deep, resonant. The voice Harlan had mocked. Judge of what? The best flavor of crack. The words echoed in Harlan's head, mocking him. Desmond sat down. He opened the file in front of him slowly, deliberately. He took a pen from his pocket. He didn't look up. "Calling case number. State of Illinois versus Quincy Ellis," he announced. "Charges. Possession of a controlled substance, resisting arrest." "Ready for the people, Your Honor," Caldwell squeaked. "Ready for the defense?" Brooke Harper said, sounding more confident than she had moments earlier. She had sensed the shift in the room. She saw the way the judge was looking at the officers. "I see we have a preliminary hearing today," Desmond said. He finally looked up, his eyes boring into Harlan. "And the arresting officers are present." "Yes, Your Honor," Caldwell said. "Officers Harlan and Reyes." "Harlan and Reyes?" Desmond repeated the names. He tasted them. He made them sound like a diagnosis of a terminal illness. "I see. Well, let's not waste the taxpayers' time. Prosecutor, call your first witness." The state called Officer Colt Harlan to the stand. Harlan stood up. His legs felt like lead. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to bolt out the back doors and never stop. But he couldn't. He was trapped. He walked to the witness stand. He felt the eyes of the entire room on him, but the only eyes that mattered were the ones behind the bench. "Raise your right hand," the clerk droned. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" Harlan raised his shaking hand. I do. "Take a seat, officer," Desmond said. He leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "And please, Officer Harlan, speak clearly. I want to hear every single word you have to say today. I am very interested in your version of the truth." The direct examination by the prosecutor was a disaster, mostly because Harlan couldn't stop stuttering. The usually cocky officer was sweating profusely, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief every few seconds. He gave the standard spiel. They were on patrol. They saw the defendant. They saw the drop. But the air in the room was suffocating. Everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then it was the defense attorney's turn. But before Brooke Harper could stand, Judge Vale raised a hand. "Miss Harper, if you'll indulge me," he said softly, "I have a few clarifying questions for the officer myself before you begin cross. Is that acceptable?" "Absolutely, Your Honor," Harper said, sitting back down with a small smile. She knew when to get out of the way. Desmond swiveled his chair to face Harlan directly. The distance between them was less than 10 feet, but it felt like a mile of hostile territory. "Officer Harlan," he began, his voice deceptively polite. "You stated that you observed Mr. Ellis from a distance of 50 feet. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And the lighting conditions? It was night, was it not?" "It was. There were street lights, Your Honor." "I see you have excellent night vision. Then you are a man who pays close attention to detail." I like to think so. It's part of the job." Desmond nodded slowly. "Detail is indeed important. Tell me, Officer Harlan, does the precinct have a policy regarding the identification of suspects before physical force is applied?" Harlan swallowed. "Yes, we identify first, unless there's an immediate threat." "An immediate threat?" Desmond repeated. "Like pumping gas or waiting for a bus." "Objection." Caldwell stood up instinctively, confused. "Relevance? Overruled?" Desmond snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. "I am testing the officer's credibility regarding his adherence to procedure." "Sit down, Mr. Caldwell." Desmond turned back to Harlan. "Let's talk about credibility, officer. You claim you saw a small baggie of narcotics in Mr. Ellis's hand from 50 feet away in the dark. Yet, is it possible for a seasoned officer to make mistakes about what they see? Is it possible, for instance, to mistake a prominent local judge for a carjacker?" The courtroom went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Harlan looked like he was going to vomit. "Your Honor, Is it possible," Desmond continued, his voice rising in volume, "to mistake a wallet for a weapon? To mistake a request for an explanation for resisting arrest?" I don't know what you mean," Harlan lied, his voice trembling. "Don't you?" Desmond leaned back. "Let's create a hypothetical, officer. Let's imagine an officer stops a citizen without probable cause. Let's say he slams that citizen's head into a car door. Let's say he steals $300 from that citizen's wallet. And then let's say that officer stands in a court of law and asks the court to trust his word against a young man's. Would you trust that officer, Harlan?" Harlan stared at his hands. He couldn't breathe. "Answer the question!" Desmond roared. The sound made the jurors in the box jump. "No," Harlan whispered. "No, I wouldn't." "Then why should I trust you?" Desmond asked, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. He picked up a piece of paper from his desk. "I have here the arrest report for Quincy Ellis. You wrote it. You signed it. You swore to it." He picked up another piece of paper. "And this is a printout of the precinct's booking log. Entry: John Doe, arrested for disorderly conduct. Arresting officers, Harlan and Reyes." Desmond held the paper up for the court to see. "That John Doe was me, Officer Harlan." The courtroom erupted. Reporters jumped to their feet. The defense attorney gasped. The prosecutor put his head in his hands. The gavel banged down, but Desmond didn't need it. His voice cut through the chaos. "Order," he commanded. "I said order." The room fell silent again, buzzing with kinetic energy. "Officer Harlan?" Desmond said, his eyes burning with a righteous fire. "You are currently under oath. You have just testified that you are a truthful and observant officer. I'm going to give you one chance, one single chance, to amend your testimony regarding the events. Did you or did you not plant that evidence on Mr. Ellis?" Harlan looked at Reyes in the front row. Reyes was weeping silently, his head in his hands. The shield of the blue wall had shattered. There was no union rep here to save him. There was no captain to sweep it under the rug. There was only the judge. Harlan looked at Quincy Ellis. The young man he was trying to send to prison just to boost his stats. Then he looked at Desmond. Harlan's voice broke. I take the Fifth. The Fifth Amendment protects you against self-incrimination, Desmond said coldly. It does not protect you from the consequences of perjury committed in my courtroom, but your silence speaks volumes. Desmond turned to this court reporter. Strike the witness's entire testimony from the record. He turned to the prosecutor. Mr. Caldwell, do you have any other evidence against Mr. Ellis? Any evidence that does not rely on the word of these two officers? Caldwell stood up, shaking his head. No, Your Honor. The state moves to dismiss. Motion granted, Desmond said. Mr. Ellis, you're free to go. I apologize on behalf of the state of Illinois for this inconvenience. Quincy Ellis looked stunned. He grabbed his lawyer's hand. Thank you, he whispered. Don't thank me yet, Desmond said, his eyes shifting back to Harlan, who was still sitting in the witness chair, looking like a trapped rat. Because we are not done. Bailiff, secure the doors. Nobody leaves this courtroom. Desmond reached under his bench and pulled out a new file. We have dealt with State versus Ellis, he said. Now, we are going to deal with a new matter. I am initiating a summary contempt proceeding, and I am issuing a bench warrant. He pointed a finger at Harlan. Officer Harlan, you are in contempt of this court. You have perjured yourself. You have attempted to defraud this judicial body, and based on my personal observation, which is admissible in a summary proceeding, I am charging you and Officer Reyes with false imprisonment, assault, and official misconduct. Desmond stood up, his robes billowing. Bailiff, he pointed to Harlan and Reyes. Take them into custody. The silence that followed Judge Vale's order was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of the courtroom. The gallery, usually a hive of whispered gossip and shuffling papers, was frozen in a tableau of shock. Me, Harlan choked out, his voice cracking. His face, usually flushed with the arrogance of authority, drained of all color until it matched the gray of the courtroom walls. You can't arrest me. I'm an officer of the law. I have immunity. You were an officer of the law, Desmond corrected, his voice cutting through the stagnation like a diamond cutter. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The robe amplified his authority 1,000-fold. Right now, Mr. Harlan, you are a defendant in a summary contempt proceeding, and in my courtroom, defendants stand when addressed. Harlan didn't stand. He couldn't. His legs had turned to water. The psychological blow of seeing his victim, the man he had mocked, beaten, and robbed, sitting on the high bench, was too much for his brain to process. The bailiff, a veteran who had seen every kind of criminal pass through these doors, didn't hesitate. He had always known Harlan was a bully. The whispers in the precinct were an open secret. He walked over to the witness stand, his heavy boots thudding against the carpet. He unclipped his own handcuffs from his belt. The metallic rasp was deafening in the quiet room. Stand up, Harlan, the bailiff grunted, grabbing the officer by the elbow. He didn't use excessive force, but he didn't use the gentle touch of a colleague either. He used the firm, unyielding grip of the state. Harlan stumbled to his feet, his eyes wide and unseeing. He looked at the prosecutor, Blake Caldwell. Blake, do something. This is insane. He's crazy. Caldwell, pale and sweating, stared studiously at his table, refusing to make eye contact. He knew a sinking ship when he saw one, and he wasn't about to drown with the captain. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed off the high limestone ceiling. It was the exact same sound that had snapped onto Desmond's wrists at the gas station, but this time, the geometry of power was inverted. The predator had become the prey. You have the right to remain silent, Desmond recited from the bench, his eyes never leaving Harlan. Anything you say can and will be used against you. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be provided for you. Desmond paused, a cold, ironic smile barely touching his lips. I suggest you find a very good one, Mr. Harlan, because unlike the public defenders you so often mock and bully in the hallways, yours will need to work miracles to explain why you assaulted a member of the judiciary. In the front row, Officer Mateo Reyes was hyperventilating. He watched his partner being manhandled and realized his own fate was sealed. He tried to stand up, perhaps to run, perhaps to beg, but two sheriff's deputies were already flanking him. They slammed him against the wall efficiently, professionally. "I was just following orders!" Reyes screamed as they cuffed him, his voice high and thin with panic. "He told me to do it. Harlan told me to search the car. I didn't want to." "Save it for the plea deal, son," one of the deputies muttered, spinning Reyes around and marching him toward the side door, the heavy steel door reserved for prisoners, not police. As the officers were hauled out of the courtroom, the spell broke. The gallery erupted. Reporters were frantically typing on their phones, their thumbs blurring. Headlines were writing themselves. Judge arrests cops in own courtroom. Justice served cold. The Mustang judge. But Desmond wasn't done. He was just getting started. "Order," he commanded, tapping his gavel once. "Mr. Caldwell." The prosecutor jumped, as if he'd been electrocuted. "Yes, Your Honor. I am recusing myself from the criminal prosecution of these two men," Desmond announced, his voice dropping to a business-like register. "As the victim of the assault, I cannot be the trier of fact in their criminal trial. However, as the presiding judge of this preliminary hearing, I have the authority to secure evidence." Desmond leaned forward, his eyes boring into Caldwell. "I am ordering that the dash cam footage and the body cam footage from the patrol unit be subpoenaed immediately. I want the hard drives on my desk. If they are lost, corrupted, or accidentally deleted, I will hold the precinct captain in contempt. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, Your Honor," Caldwell stammered. "I'll go get them personally, right now." "And Mr. Caldwell?" "Yes? Check the evidence locker. If my $300 isn't there, and based on Officer Reyes's reaction, I suspect it is currently in his locker or his wallet, add theft by a public servant to the charge sheet, and add a civil rights violation under Title 18 while you're at it." "It will be done, Judge." Caldwell practically ran out of the courtroom, desperate to be on the right side of history. The processing down in the basement of the courthouse, in the holding intake, was toxic. Harlan and Reyes were stripped of their belts, their shoelaces, and their badges. The items were placed into plastic bags, labeled personal effects of prisoner. Harlan sat on the cold metal bench, the same type of bench Desmond had sat on. He stared at the concrete floor. The adrenaline had worn off, replaced by a crushing, nauseating dread. He knew the law. He knew exactly what happened to cops in prison. "You idiot," Reyes hissed from the corner. "You arrogant idiot, just a nobody. That's what you said, just a guy with a Mustang." "Shut up, Mateo." "No, I won't shut up," Reyes yelled, tears streaming down his face. "I have a baby on the way, Colt. I have a mortgage. I'm going to lose everything because you wanted to play tough guy. I'm telling them everything. I'm telling them about the skim. I'm telling them about the planted evidence in the Ellis case. I'm telling them about the gas station. Everything." Harlan didn't respond. He just closed his eyes, listening to the sound of his own life imploding. The media storm hit. The story hadn't just broken. It had gone nuclear. Caldwell had secured the footage. It had been leaked. Nobody knew by whom, though everyone suspected Desmond's clerk, Lila, to the local news stations. The video played on a loop on every channel in Chicago. It showed everything. The grainy, low-light footage of Desmond pumping gas, the aggressive tactical approach of the cruiser, the mocking laughter as Harlan slapped the cuffs on, the clear, undeniable audio of Harlan twisting Desmond's arm, while Desmond calmly stated, "I am presiding." It was viral gold. It was undeniable proof of what every community activist had been saying for decades. But this time, the victim was the ultimate symbol of the establishment. News vans were parked 3 deep outside the precinct. The police chief was nowhere to be found. The Fraternal Order of Police issued a 2-sentence statement acknowledging serious allegations and promising an internal review. But everyone knew the internal review didn't matter. The court of public opinion had already returned a verdict. In chambers, Judge Desmond Vale sat watching the news on a small TV in the corner. He had removed his robe. He was back in his suit, nursing a cup of tea. His left wrist was wrapped in an ACE bandage, throbbing in time with his heartbeat. He felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and clarity. He had spent decades in the legal system, but today was the first time he felt he had truly touched the raw nerve of justice. His clerk, Lila, knocked on the door. Her eyes were wide with a mix of awe and excitement. "Judge," she said softly, "the phone hasn't stopped ringing. The mayor called, the governor called, CNN is on the line too, but there's someone here to see you. It's Quincy Ellis." Desmond turned off the TV. The noise of the pundits was giving him a headache. "Send him in, Lila." Quincy walked in. He looked small in the large oak-paneled office, surrounded by leather-bound law books. He was holding a crumpled baseball cap in his hands, twisting it nervously. He looked at the floor, then at the bookshelves, then finally at Desmond. I wanted to say thanks," Quincy whispered. "For real. Nobody ever stood up for me like that. I thought I was gone. My public defender said 5 years mandatory minimum. I was ready to plead out just to get it over with." Desmond stood up and walked around the heavy desk. He extended his hand, the one with the bandage. "You don't need to thank me for doing my job, Quincy," he said, his voice warm. "But I need you to understand something. Today wasn't a miracle. It was a mistake, a glitch in the matrix." Quincy looked up, confused. "Sir, the system worked today because I was the one in the hoodie," Desmond said intensely. "If I had been anyone else, if I had been a teacher, a mechanic, a nurse, you would be going to jail, and Officer Harlan would be at a bar celebrating his arrest stats. That is not justice. That is luck." Desmond placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "So, I need you to do something for me. You have a second chance now, a clean slate. Go home, finish school. Don't let this city break you. Don't let the anger consume you. Use it." Quincy stared at him for a long moment. He saw the bruise on the judge's wrist, the tiredness in his eyes. "Use it how?" he asked. "Become a lawyer," Desmond said, a small smile appearing. "Become a judge. Get into this room on your own merit. Change the damn system from the inside so that the next time a kid is waiting for a bus, he doesn't need a judge and a Mustang to save him." A spark lit up in Quincy's eyes. It was the first time in a long time he had looked at an authority figure and seen a path forward rather than a wall. "Yes, sir," he said, standing a little taller. "I think I'd like that." Desmond watched him leave. He walked to the window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. The city was vast, complicated, and broken. But the scales had tipped in the right direction, and Desmond knew that the real fight, the trial of Harlan and Reyes, would begin. As the case finally came to trial, the fall for Officer Colt Harlan was absolute. He was no longer the swaggering king of the night shift. He was a pariah. His union representative had quietly stopped returning his calls after the dashcam footage leaked. His wife, tired of the scrutiny of reporters on their lawn, had taken the kids and moved to her sister's. Harlan sat at the defense table in the courtroom, picking at a loose thread on the sleeve of a suit he had bought at a discount outlet. It was ill-fitting, bunching at the shoulders, making him look smaller than he was. Beside him sat Mateo Reyes. The younger officer looked like a ghost. He had lost significant weight. His eyes were hollow, darting around the room as if expecting a trap door to open beneath him. The courtroom was packed to capacity. The gallery was a sea of faces. Community activists, law students, curious citizens, and a heavy contingent of off-duty officers who were there not to support Harlan, but to see which way the wind was blowing. Presiding over the case was Judge Vanessa Brooks. If Desmond Vale was a scalpel, precise and surgical, Judge Brooks was a hammer. She was a legend in the Cook County system, a woman who had spent years as a prosecutor before taking the bench. She had zero tolerance for nonsense, and even less for corruption. "All rise!" the bailiff bellowed. Judge Brooks swept into the room, her black robes billowing like storm clouds. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and looked down at the defense table with a gaze that could strip paint. "Be seated. We are here for closing arguments and sentencing in the matter of the people versus Harlan and Reyes. Before proceeding, the defense had a final motion. Harlan's lawyer, a man named Miles Grant, who usually handled DUI cases, stood up. He looked out of his depth. Yes, Your Honor. We move for a mistrial based on prejudicial publicity. The video has been viewed millions of times online. There is no way this jury can be impartial. Judge Brooks didn't even blink. Mr. Grant, the video is evidence. The fact that the public has seen your client assault a citizen does not grant him immunity from the consequences. Motion denied. Sit down. The trial had been a slow-motion car crash for the defense. The prosecution, led by a special prosecutor brought in to avoid conflict of interest, had been ruthless. They had played the video, then they played it in slow motion, then they played the audio of Harlan laughing. But the defining moment, the moment etched into the minds of every person in the room, had been Desmond Vale's testimony. Grant had tried to be clever. He had tried to paint Desmond as the aggressor, a man who baited the police. Judge Vale? Grant had asked, pacing in front of the witness stand. You're a man of the law. You know how dangerous the streets are. Why didn't you just show your badge immediately? Why did you hide who you were? Isn't it true that you wanted this to happen? That you entrapped these officers? Desmond had sat in the witness chair, his demeanor calm, almost serene. He leaned into the microphone. Mr. Grant, he replied, his voice filling the room without shouting. I did not show my badge because I was not wearing it. I was buying Gatorade, and nowhere in the Constitution does it say that a citizen must be a judge to be treated with basic human dignity. I didn't hide who I was. I was a citizen of Chicago. If that wasn't enough for your client to treat me with respect, then the problem isn't my ID. The problem is your client. The jury had nodded in unison. That was the nail in the coffin. Back in the present, the jury foreman stood up. Have you reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. Harlan stopped breathing. The air in the room seemed to adhere to his skin, hot and suffocating. Reyes put his head in his hands. On the charge of official misconduct, the foreman read, we find the defendant, Colt Harlan, guilty. A gasp rippled through the room. On the charge of aggravated battery in a public place, guilty. On the charge of perjury, guilty. On the charge of theft, guilty. Each guilty was a physical blow. Harlan flinched with every count. The veneer of the tough cop, the Teflon badge, the arrogance of the station house. It was all stripped away, leaving a terrified man facing the ruin of his life. When the foreman read the verdicts for Reyes, they were slightly lighter. He was acquitted of the assault, but guilty of the misconduct and the theft. He had followed orders, but he had also followed Harlan into the abyss. Judge Brooks nodded. The jury is dismissed with the gratitude of the court. She turned her attention to the two men standing before her. The silence stretched out, heavy and absolute. Gentlemen, Judge Brooks began, her voice low and dangerous. I have sat on this bench for years. I have sent murderers, rapists, and gang leaders to prison. But nothing disgusts me more than a dirty badge. She picked up a file from her desk. Mr. Harlan, you didn't just break the law. You broke the covenant between the people and the state. You relied on the fear of the citizens to protect you. You thought that because you had a gun and a radio, you were a god. You thought you could take a man's money, break his arm, and laugh about it because he was nobody. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Harlan. But you forgot the most basic lesson of democracy. There are no nobodies. And when you strike a citizen, you strike us all. You assaulted a judge. Yes. But as Judge Vale testified, his title is irrelevant. You assaulted a human being. Harlan tried to speak. Your Honor, I served for years. And you undid every day of that service in minutes. Brooks cut him off. You're a bully, Mr. Harlan, and bullies do not fare well in my courtroom. She looked at the sentencing guidelines. Colt Harlan, for the crimes you have been convicted of, and with the aggravating factor of abusing your public office, I sentence you to a total of 15 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. You will serve at least 85% of that sentence. You are remanded to custody immediately. Harlan's knees buckled. He grabbed the defense table to keep from collapsing. As for you, Mateo Reyes, Judge Brooks continued, turning to the sobbing younger man. You are young. You were influenced by a superior, but you had a choice. You could have said no. You could have reported him. Instead, you took the money. You are sentenced to 5 years. The gavel came down. Bang! The sound was final. It was the period at the end of a long, ugly sentence. As the bailiffs moved in, real corrections officers this time, wearing the dark uniforms of the state prison system, the reality set in. Harlan held out his hands. The clicking of the handcuffs was the only sound in the room. He turned around, desperate for a lifeline. He scanned the gallery. He saw the reporters, their pens flying across notepads. He saw the activists nodding in grim satisfaction. And then he saw him. Desmond Vale was sitting in the back row near the exit. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't cheering. He looked sad. Harlan locked eyes with the man he had tormented. In that moment, the memory of the gas station played out between them. The laughter, the insults. Judge of what? The best flavor of crack. Harlan's lips trembled. He realized too late the enormity of his mistake. It wasn't just that he had arrested a judge. It was that he had become the very thing he swore to fight. A criminal. I'm sorry, Harlan mouthed across the room. It was soundless, but Desmond saw it. Desmond didn't look away. He offered a slow, solemn nod. It wasn't forgiveness. That wasn't for him to give right now. But it was an acknowledgement. The debt is paid. The side door opened, and the officers led Harlan and Reyes away. The heavy door clicked shut, swallowing them into the bowels of the correction system. Desmond stood up. He buttoned his coat. He felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Quincy Ellis. The young man looked different now. He was wearing a shirt and tie. He stood straighter. The fear that had defined him was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. Is it over? Quincy asked. The trial is over, Desmond said, his voice weary but strong. But the work isn't. They walked out of the courtroom together, the judge and the young man whose lives had been inextricably bound by a random act of injustice. Outside, the air was crisp and clean. A flank of reporters waited at the bottom of the courthouse steps, microphones raised like spears. Judge Vale, do you feel vindicated? Judge, what's your message to the police force today? Desmond paused on the landing. He looked out at the city skyline, the buildings gleaming in the sun. He thought about the thousands of officers who did the job right every day. And he thought about the ones like Harlan, who rotted the system from the inside. He stepped up to the microphones. Vindication is a cheap word, Desmond said, his voice carrying over the crowd. This wasn't about me. This was about the fact that justice cannot be blind if the people enforcing it are corrupt. Today, the system worked, but it worked because I had the privilege of position. It worked because I knew the law. My concern and my mission is for the people who don't have those shields. He looked directly into the camera lens. To every officer who wears the badge with honor, we see you and we thank you. But to those who think the badge is a shield for their own ego, remember Colt Harlan. The law is patient, the law is long, and eventually, the law wins. Desmond turned and walked away, leaving the chaos of the media behind him. He walked toward his car. He took out his phone and dialed a number. Hello? Admissions office, University of Chicago Law School. Yes. Hello, Desmond said, glancing back at Quincy Ellis, who was walking toward the bus stop. This is Judge Desmond Vale. I'd like to request an application packet for a prospective student. His name is Quincy Ellis. I'll be writing his letter of recommendation personally. Desmond smiled for the first time in a long while. He hung up the phone, got into his car, and drove off into the city. The scales were balanced. The docket was cleared. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how the gavel strikes back. Colt Harlan thought he was the predator, but he picked a fight with the wrong prey. He lost his badge, his freedom, and his pride, all because he judged a book by its cover. This story is a reminder that character is what you do when you think no one is watching. Power isn't about the uniform you wear. It's about the integrity you carry. Judge Vale didn't just win a court case. He saved a young man's future and cleaned up the streets in a way he never could have from the bench alone. If you believe that nobody is above the law, whether they have a badge, a gavel, or a hoodie, hit that like button right now. It helps us share these stories of justice. And if you want more true crime drama and karma payback stories like this, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. What would you have done if you were Judge Vale? Would you have revealed yourself at the gas station or waited for the courtroom trap? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, stay smart, and I'll see you in the next one.